Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Archetype, sponsored by Lenovo and AMD. I'm your host, Ashley, as usual. And let's talk about what we did last week. Say hi in the chat if you're there. I always like saying hi. Hi, Jace. Hi, Ben. Hello, YouTube and Twitch. So last week, we started doing our D&D character, the Druid. Right, so this is what we kind of came up with, and here's some of the reference that we had. Obviously, we can gather more as we might, need some or find more inspiration elsewhere. But for now, this is kind of what we have. Whoops, meant to. So we're gonna pop that back up onto my other screen. I'm always having my reference up, by the way, my drawings and my PRF. It's just on a different screen, but I like to bring it down to show you guys that it's always there. And one thing that I want to talk about before we get started is we're kind of sculpting this, I wouldn't say super differently, but we are going to be considering the scale of the character in which we're going to be sculpting it in, because my goal at the end of it is to 3D print it. So, I don't know if you guys can see because I know my monitor's really tiny on your guys' thing, but they're going to be really small. So this is, oops, no, don't break. Oh my God. So this is one of the little dudes that I printed. This is my little animal companion. His name's Parappa, little raptor with a little bit of Asian inspiration. So he's supposed to have like a bit of a, Chinese dragon type feel for him. But they're very small. They're super small little characters. Yes, if you get Parappa the raptor, then I can understand your age. So his name is Parappa. But yeah, so they're very small. So what I have here, and I can show you my scene. This is how I actually work on miniatures for printing. Is I have this ruler. It's a 6-inch ruler. That's to scale. So this is actually 6 inches. And then these are little bases, and you can see that I have the proportions for what a tiny creature would be versus what a small creature bounding box would be versus medium. Medium is usually about where humanoids or your character would fit. And then anything bigger than that gets a bigger base. So a 2-inch base, and here's large. It goes all the way to gargantuan, which is like a 4-inch tall character. So I have all these kind of set up in a different scene, so I can bring these in to other scenes as I start sculpting. So that way I can kind of stay in the right scale. It doesn't have to be perfect right now, but it's good to be in some sort of scale. So that way when you're making stuff, you can see the thicknesses that you're making for this type of scale, because it is going to be so small that everything's going to feel very chunky. Everything's going to look really thick, but when you actually measure it, it's going to be 0.02 of a inch big or something like that. So So Jace is asking, can your printer manage small strands for like hair for a model like that size? Well, you can see here, I don't know if the guy can back me up, and it's really hard to see because my camera's not great, but you can see the tiny hair strands that printed on this guy. I can't get it to focus super well. But there's little hair. Now, the secret is that it's kind of clumped, right? There's not individual strands. You can actually, if you look hard enough on this dude, and maybe one day I'll take a picture of it where it's better, but I can see the scales, and I can also see the teeth on this dude. And I'll show you what this guy looked like just as an example. So I'll bring up my post Parappa. So this is to scale. So there's the base. So this is what this character printed looked like, and you can see that the details are kind of like thick and like really chunky, but they print really well. And you can see that the teeth, I try to make sure that the teeth are all kind of like grouped together so they have something a bit more substantial. And you can see that even the fur and the hair and stuff is kind of all clumped together. I didn't worry about making it super fine, right? Because really it's about seeing it from, maybe this far away, right? And a really neat little trick that I like to do is this is an inch square that I wrote on a little piece of paper. What you can do is you can take this inch and you can put it up on your screen, and you can kind of compare how big that inch base is to this like written little square, and then you can kind of see to scale how big your model will be. So that's kind of a easy little like cheap trick that you can do. Hello, my name is Yin. So Ben is asking, printing in such a small size, is it a challenge or is there technical limitations? It's more of a challenge when it comes to the thinness of something. So, you know, like staffs and bow and arrows or things, anything that becomes very thin can be problematic. I'm going to hide the base for now because we're just going to focus on blocking in the character now. But yeah, just thin things can be kind of problematic. And then obviously, you know, you can't fit in as much detail sometimes as you want to, but that's kind of fun. You know, I think I've talked about on this stream before how limitations kind of are important as an artist to accept. So if your limitation is the size in which you're making something, then that just means you get to think about that limitation and figure out what are the important shapes that you need to have. You know, what is the biggest silhouette on the character? You know, do I need to make the horns bigger so when it prints you can like see that better? You know, how am I going to make sure the mask is visible compared to like the hair? You know, what kind of breakup can I have at that scale that can sell who the character is, right? And the goal is to make sure that when we print them, they all have very different looking silhouettes. So that way everybody can tell who their character is on the board at any given time. So it's a really fun limitation to play with. Limitation does not mean like doesn't have to mean like a weakness or that, you know, it's weird because a limitation meaning like you're limited, it is important to think of, but you don't want to think of it as a way of, like, you don't want to think of it as a bad thing, is what I'm trying to say. You want to think of it as more of like an opportunity to do something creative. Working within limitations will always make you a more creative artist. So I think it's just really important to kind of embrace that stuff. Got some people quoting some parappa. Someone's asking, have I heard of AI stable diffusion? I have. I don't really play with AI. I just like to do good old-fashioned art, so I don't really know much about it. Jace is saying that you have trouble printing because your hair isn't clumped together. Yeah, that is like a limitation, right? It's actually cooler to probably make one big shape, right? That feels right, than to try to like do all these tiny little hair strands, because it is going to just be more technically challenging, and it might not even end up looking as good as something that is just like a big clump. You know, when you're thinking about this stuff, think about, you know, if you look at like 2D animation, right? They don't sculpt and draw every single little hair strand, right? Like they kind of clump things together. I mean, even look at this example that we have from Princess Mononoke here. You know, they're not drawing every individual fur strand. You know, they're giving you the overall shape. And that's kind of the thing that you want to capture when we're making something. I mean, basically it's the same thing, right? It's a mask with fur on top of her. So heavy inspiration, right? But you can see that we're going to kind of execute this fur in a very similar way to how they would execute it for 2D animation. Because again, the limitation with 2D animation is not the printing, but it's the fact that you have to draw it over and over and over and over again, right? So how do you create something that you can draw multiple times, thousands of times, is the important part when it comes to that stuff, right? So limitation is what creates style in something, at least in my opinion. That's where style can kind of come from, is choosing what you can and can't do, you know, given the technology or given the world. You know, if you're world building, you know, if your place has magic, does that mean that there's no like real world? There's an alternate dimension. You know, what breaks and what doesn't break, what can or can they not do with magic? You know, limitations don't just go beyond, you know, just technical stuff. It gets into everything when it comes to like what you're making. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Again, you guys have seen me do this many times, just blocking out, getting those basic cylinders in. Pull this down. Someone's asking what software it is. My name is Yin Nailed It. This is ZBrush, so this is a 3D modeling program. If you're not used to it, if you want to try out a different modeling program, if you're new to 3D, I would suggest Blender's a really great place to start, because you can do 3D modeling, you can do rendering in there, you can texture and paint and UV, you can do all these things. They're all very, 3D technical intensive and whatnot, but it's all in one program and it's free. So, if you want to dive into something similar to like what you see right now on the stream, that's my recommendation. I've recommended it before in the past. I'm picking up everything. Just starting to move around these shapes. The brush of the Z, created by Goku and the other Z warriors that saved the Earth. Oh my gosh, absolutely, 100%. The first thing that I actually 3D printed was a Vegeta. I don't know if you can see him on my. Can you see him up there? I don't know if you can see him up there. I have a giant Dragon Ball, and there's a gray model of Vegeta, and that one's let's see if I can point to it. That guy right there. He's doing a sideways kick that's inspired from Dragon Ball Fighters. Fighter Z. I just say fighters. Good times. Vegeta Blue was my main man in that game. That game's so fun. But Vegeta's definitely my number one. He's my favorite character. And Toriyama's least favorite character, apparently, even though Vegeta probably has the best character development of any of them in the series. This is something that I talk about also all the time on this, is that idea of embrace the suck, which means, your model's going to start out looking kind of like a dumb little dummy character, right? But over time, as we start refining these shapes more and more throughout the stream, you'll see that it starts to get slowly better and better and better. So it's just important to embrace the suck. It's going to look weird and wonky and wobbly for a bit, but that's okay. Because she's a female too, I'm also going to try to make sure that I really pull out these hips more. I can get this more triangle shape going. That'll be the goal. Sometimes it's just easier to start blending this stuff to get kind of a nice shape going. And at first, when it comes to sculpting females, I think one thing that I've seen students do a lot is they'll sculpt the chest too soon before actually blocking in the rest of the body, and it gets really confusing. And by chest, I do mean like female breasts. I know it's always like students always get like red face and weird when I talk about it, but if you're sculpting a female character, it's part of the female anatomy. But one thing to remember when you're sculpting this stuff for a female character is female characters also have pectoral muscles, and they have the same exact muscles underneath as a male. It's just in different proportions. So, hello, there's a puppy that's bothering me. Oh my goodness. Can you hear her? So it's important to just remember that to keep your anatomy almost the same, it's just the proportions are going to change. And then you can always add the female breasts on top after you have other shapes blocked in, because that's really all what it is when you look at, you know, anatomy studies and stuff of that. Too many people, I think, get too bogged down, too distracted by it, trying to get it right too early, and then it ends up kind of looking weird or not in the right place because they haven't blocked in the rest of it first. And it should still look like a feminine. You can make something look feminine without having those features there yet. So that's my advice. So we don't want her to feel strong. You don't want them to feel like so super skinny and weak. You know, it's not like a 11-year-old schoolgirl or something. You know, she's a survivor that lives out in the wilderness, in nature. So obviously she fends for herself. She has her handy dandy raptor to go along with it. So that helps. But it's important that we're going to try to make this character feel strong. I'm also going to take the feet. I'm going to turn them out a little bit. This helps with getting the silhouette of these legs in here. Also, another tip for feminine heroes and whatnot, a really easy thing to do actually is just to make their legs longer than you think. If you look at like fashion model drawings or like fashion drawings, you'll see that they make their legs ludicrously long. But it doesn't really look wrong. It just looks kind of cool. Even though nobody on the planet Earth has legs that look like that. So again, kind of pushing certain areas to accentuate, you know, some sort of form of elegance is always preferable. So we can make our characters' legs a lot longer than their torso. And we could even get away with doing it maybe even longer. Another thing that makes legs look longer too is bringing up where that pelvic line is right here. So that's going to give you a much longer looking torso, or not torso, legs. Even though you're not actually lengthening the legs, you're basically changing where the great trochanter is, which would be lengthening the femur, but you're not actually like taking the legs and, you know, moving them way down here or something like that. So that's another kind of way to make them feel a little longer. We're really pushing that Bridgman type pose of this S curve, you know. Don't be afraid to push it pretty far with this straight plus curve in the legs. You'd be surprised how far you could push it until it looks broken. You get pretty far with it. So just keep that in mind. I would say push it farther than you want to, and then you can always dial it back later if you need to. A lot of this stuff might not feel right until we start blending some of these areas together. Especially areas like the knee. There's so many little tiny forms that go on in the knee that make it feel like a knee. So it's important to, you know, start adding some of these details in. Making your head maybe a little smaller. The head is always going to have to change because as we start sculpting on it, the head almost always gets smaller than you intend for it to be. It's just kind of the way of the process. So. I always find making feet is a lot easier when you just do the silhouette from the bottom, and then you can kind of figure out the volumes that sit on top. The easiest profile to remember and know is the bottom of the foot, and then you can just get the volumes to match on top where all those silhouettes are. And I feel like that usually helps. A little tiptoed at the moment, so we can kind of flatten this foot down a little bit. I like to use this little border at the very bottom to kind of flatten my character's feet to make sure that it's standing at the right plane. Where the bottom of the butt is lower than where the crotch is. So the crotch is halfway. If you were to basically draw a line across, the crotch should be higher up than the bottom of the butt. So that's always a nice way to make sure that you're hitting, again, those curves that you're trying to hit on not just the female body, but any body. So what we're trying to get here is, let's see if I can bring it up real quick. So the goal ultimately is to get this to this to this there, right? So you want something that feels really fluid. The one thing that you don't want is a concave shape going into a concave shape. You don't want something that feels like this for the body. You want something that feels like this for the body, right? Regardless of what, shape it is, whether it's the leg or something else. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for right now. And eventually it'll be the same for the arm. The arm has its own silhouettes, whether it's straights versus curves, and then straights versus curves. There has to be some sort of feeling of flow that goes into these things. Or else it just kind of feels very lumpy and not intentional. And the other thing too to look for is plumb line. So plumb line is the line that goes from the base of the neck all the way down, and you want to make sure that it basically hits kind of the middle of the foot, or where the weight is. The weight should feel evenly distributed. It's really easy to make your character feel maybe something like that. It feels kind of off balance, or a lot of people put it too far forward, and then the plumb line is off. So you want to make sure that you have that balance between. So between all these curves, there's also this nice straight line that goes straight through your character model. Jace is asking, do I have a Discord? I do not have one for the stream, but if that's something that people would be interested in, just say it and tell them in the chat, and Gnomon might be able to make it happen. I don't know. But as of now, no, I do not. I have my own personal Discord, but I don't give that out for streaming. Also, a good rule of thumb too, it's not always the case, but if you want to give a more feminine look to your character, usually making the shoulders a little more narrow. Doesn't have to be narrower than the hips. It could be about equal length and give that hourglass figure. Again, these are just more of like heroic standard proportions. everything always changes. But for the character that I'm going for like fairly standard heroic proportions. I'm gonna try to pinch those shoulders in to get kind of an angle. And then again, we can use our silhouette to see how our silhouette is looking, and make sure that we don't have any weird curve within curve. So you can see the legs right now kind of have that shape that I was talking about that goes into one another. So to help combat that, we can pull one side down and pull one side up a little bit and have this maybe curl out a little bit more. This is going to take some way more refining and sculpting, but you can kind of start to get the idea here. Legs are always, at least for me, legs have always been one of the trickiest things to get right. Make them not just look like lazy cylinders, but something interesting with like flow and proper anatomy. It's always been a challenge for me. So just knowing what you're good at and knowing what you can improve on is also important as an artist. Just trying to find these smooth silhouettes. So I'm sculpting, but I'm looking at the silhouette to tell me where I might be messing up. And actually for me right now, I think it's actually going to be easier to merge these together to get this knee feeling right. So I'm making very small changes too. Basically just looking at silhouette and slowly rotating around and seeing if I can find places where that silhouette can improve. My name is Yin is asking, is this a character I'm playing in a campaign? And the answer is yes. So kind of killing two birds with one stone. I'm making my character, and then I'll be making on the stream, not all, but some of my friends' characters that we're working on and doing in the campaign. So yeah, it should be a lot of fun. But yeah, this is my character, so I'm playing as a druid for our campaign. And really that's just my excuse to be able to, one, have a pet dinosaur, and two, to turn into a dinosaur myself eventually. So like she's kind of feels like bow-legged right now because her knees are kind of turned in. So I kind of want to turn these out. And then we can just move this back. What's the subclass? Oh, I don't have I'm using Pathfinder, and we're not going with subclasses. It's just Druid. You're asking, like, I'm assuming you mean, like, is it Moon Druid or this or whatever. It's none of those things. It's just like your basic type. If you played Pathfinder, they don't really have like those types of alignments, or you pick forget what it's called. I'm not as experienced in D&D as some of my other friends, so they don't remember the names. But the only subclass is I'm a half elf. Oh, that's good to know. Which I think I talked about last time, so that's what I've got like the pointy ears and stuff. Oh yes. My dog Freya, wherever she went, she disappeared. She is quite cute. But she's wondering why we're not going on a WLK right now. So she's gonna come up and be impatient. Probably the entire stream. So you'll see her pretty often. Oh, this character's name. The name is Sora. So it's a Japanese name that's normally spelled S-O-R-A. But in my case, I spell it S-A-U-R-A because of the dinosaur Sora. So just kind of having a fun play on words name. Because the goal is that I'm just going to turn into a bunch of dinosaurs. That's at least the idea. I just thought would be kind of fun. And then obviously, if you know, you know, Parappa the raptor is my animal companion, which is also fun. I think right now my raptor is actually the strongest thing in our group because we're all just still like we just started, so we're all just like level 1 losers. So yeah, my raptor is way stronger than all of us right now. It's pretty great. We'll start to get, I like to get a bend in the elbow. Just makes it a little easier to place muscles. Ooh, you're giving me the character. That's cool. I'm assuming. I'm just gonna say you're right because I don't know. I wish I could learn the characters. That's cool. I'll have to go back into the chat and save that. Because maybe we can put it as maybe we can inscribe it somewhere. I mean, I don't know if you inscribe your name on something, we could do something like that. That could be fun. I'm gonna add hands for now, but I can show you a fun way to add hands actually, is to do it through Zspheres. So I can insert a Zsphere if you guys have never seen these. They're very weird looking, but they're actually pretty useful for making hands, and I'll show you. There's a puppy underneath me wanting attention. Basically, they're like these weird little balls that you can draw out, and you can scale them down, move them around. So I'm going to make basically the palm. And then what I can do is I can draw out 1 and then 2. Whoops. You gotta make your brush, there we go. Brush size should be pretty small. I'm basically making kind of like the first knuckle, and then there's the finger, and I'll do that for each of these. So I'll move this around. So there's the 4 fingers, and then I'm gonna add, I'll pull these out. So basically you get salad fingers. If you know what that is, then you've been on the internet for a while. And then I'll pull out the thumb. And it's just really easy to pose a hand. You can see that you can easily get the hand look fairly quickly. Yes, the rusty spoon. But what I like about this is you can kind of pose where the fingers will go. And then once you have that, you can insert the joints really easily by just hitting Q to insert all the knuckles. And now I can pose these hands pretty easily. To get like a nice salad fingers pose here. And if you grab the in-between, you can actually literally rotate it almost like a joint, which is pretty nice. It's based on camera, so just keep that in mind. But yeah, you can get something that kind of looks like that. And then these are a little small, but I can just go in and scale them up a little bit. And by default, this might be, that's not too bad of a size, but sometimes it might be by default, like too small or too big, but we can always change that once we've kind of got the layout. But you can see you can really nicely, easily pose some even looking fingers. And I'm just gonna scale up all these joints for a little bit right here, just so that they feel somewhat the same thickness. You can leave the pinky maybe a little thinner, you know, but this is nice because then you can also make sure that the knuckles are in the right apexes. You can give height, the proper, you know, bend that you would normally see in a hand. And then if I hit A, you can see it, well, by default, it always turns into Dynamesh, which is dumb. And I'll get to your question in a second, Ben. I see it. I'm just going to show this real quick. So by default in adaptive skin, it turns on Dynamesh, which is dumb. So turn that to 0. And then if I hit A, you can see now there's a preview of what the mesh will look like. And if I turn the density down to 1, you'll see I get a really, really simple mesh, which is cool. So I'll usually just keep that mesh and just sculpt on that for the hand and keep the hand separate because it gives you a nice, gives you okay topology. Like this orange bit isn't great, but for what we're doing, it totally works. So when you're ready for that, you can say make adaptive skin, and by default, it doesn't look like it does anything, but it does. It just puts it in a different tool. So then you can insert it into there, and now there it is. And now I can have my Zspheres here, or you can just delete it later. And now we have a little creepy spindly hand that we can go in and, you know, adjust and sculpt on top of even more after the fact. I have an exact idea where all those knuckles are, right? Because it splits them up into polygroups, which is nice as well. Technically, this thumb area is also a polygroup, so that would be the third joint. So yeah, gives you like a pretty nice hand by default. It's not, again, not perfect, but close enough. And then Ben's question was, finding the right balance between the head size and the character overall size is difficult. How do I deal with this? So one thing, especially in 3D, that's actually really easy to do is, by default, most heroic characters are usually like 8 heads tall. So you can say delete hidden, and you can move this over to the side, and you can either just, you know, hold control and just copy it 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 8.5 is actually pretty normal. So you can see by default, my character is about 8.5 heads tall. So that's usually a good proportion range to stick to. It's not always the case, you know. Again, if you're making like a really buff, bulky character, you're building like an ogre, like a troll, like their head's gonna be way smaller than their overall size and proportion. So, you know, you gotta know what kind of character you're building. But if you're building a default character like this is a pretty nice little reference to have for yourself. And then, you know, if you look up Andrew Loomis's work, he'll break everything down by head. So, you know, head where head 4 ends should be about where the crotch ends, and you can see that that's about right for my character. I made her legs a little bit longer than like the standard female human, you know? So that's where you're getting like maybe a slight discrepancy, but you know, that's pretty damn close. And I would say that, you know, no one's gonna really harp you too much on something like that. But that's where I usually, if you're kind of doubting where your proportions are, you can always kind of double check that as reference. And that works pretty well. So I'm gonna switch to the skin shader. It's really bright by default, but lower the opacity or lower the color on it. I can take this and do a mirror and weld. So now I have 2 hands on each side. My little puppy is being very impatient. Do you see it? Oh yeah, you guys can see her on the stream. She's just hanging out. She wants me to turn around because then she'll start to paw me and she'll be like, I want to go on the thing. Let's do the thing. And I'm like, I can't yet, puppy. We got like another hour 20, poor thing. Oh my gosh, my name in the game just gave me the character for, it means dinosaur, but it technically means something like dragon to be afraid of. But I love that. That's awesome. I'm totally gonna snapshot that and save that for later because I will use that. That's super cool. Because I have a little, I think it's right here. I have a little D&D journal that I'm doing like sketches of while we play and make notes, like a journal, as if I'm my actual character. It's also a way for me to remember the campaign for like important info that I need to remember and things like that. So I'm totally going to write that down and utilize that. That's awesome. Thank you. I'm a big nerd for stuff like that. I think it's super fun. Also, anything about dinosaurs is a pretty easy win for me. Not going to lie. Cool. So I feel like we got a pretty decent block out of character overall. Now we're going to start blocking out her face. So I'm going to split this off like I usually do. Because again, you almost always need more topology to sculpt onto the face than you do for the rest of the body, because proportionally it's a lot smaller than the rest of the body. So Dynamesh needs to be a little higher resolution. And a good note for this too is I'm working at, you can see my resolution for this is pretty high. And remember, it's because I'm working to a tiny, tiny scale. So keep that in mind. So if you want to deal with, if you don't want to deal with really high resolution Dynamesh, you can sculpt it somewhat at a normal scale and then scale it down when you're done using Dynamesh. But just be very aware of when you have a thickness that's really big and you scale it down, it's exponentially getting thinner. And that's where the danger of, you know, sculpting something at the wrong scale comes into play. And then your stuff will be like paper thin without you even realizing it. I think it's also important to block in where the ears go. So that's an easy one, is I just grab something from the side and I'll extract it and I just say okay to whatever it tells me, because it doesn't matter. And then I'm gonna run a Dynamesh on it. And then we can move this out. I have pretty long ears for my character, so we're just going to get somewhere in the ballpark here. Move those in, push them out. And again, this is also important to note too that, I mean, this doesn't matter so much right now, but if I sculpt this to be like really, really thin, when I print it, that's going to be so hard to print. So you actually kind of want this roundness in almost everything, even if it's a fine point, you know, like the dinosaur that I did. You can see that these don't end for the most part on like super fine tips. They're actually pretty rounded, but when you print them and you look at them, they're the thinnest part of the fur, so they'll look thin. So it's things like that that you don't usually think about when sculpting for 3D printing. But keep that stuff in mind as well when you're sculpting this stuff, is everything should have more thickness than you think when you're making this stuff at this scale. I get that base of the neck proper. And make sure she has a nice defined jaw. And make sure that you can pinch this maybe a little bit to try to get a nice pointed face. Pinch this in. Our heads are a lot more flat on the side. And our heads are also not round, right? Like there's an oval shape, but also they kind of taper outwards. They go out this way, right? So it shouldn't be a flat shape all the way across. It should actually taper into the face, and the wider part of the skull is in the back here. And then same thing here, the widest part on this, or the apex of the skull, is usually somewhere up here, and then it all kind of tapers down from there. And it's usually pretty planar, actually. You'll kind of get this 1, 2, 3 more than you will like a perfectly round head. Can't emphasize staying in this type of stage for a while until you figure out, you know, your proportions. And if this doesn't feel right by default, then you shouldn't move on to like detailing the eyes or getting anything else in. You know, you want to make sure that, does the mouth feel like in the right spot? Does the nose feel correct? Does where the bridge of the face and the nose come in, does that feel good? You know, I want it to maybe be a bit more rounded because it's a female face, right? So how does that feel? You know, trying to get these shapes in first is really, really important before you can move on to any other stage. You know, finding the right shape for the eye sockets first is, even though you'll fill them in later, it's still really important to find that base structure that you're dealing with. And checking your profiles from every angle is super important. So most people probably don't look upward enough at their anatomy, but knowing that, you know, the zygomatic arch here rounds around, and where's the apex of that arch. If it helps you to sculpt it in, you know, to know that the zygomatic arch is here, here's your eye socket, and it goes back into here, and underneath here is the little, where your ear is, right? And then your mouth comes down, and it's a kind of like a rounded muzzle. You can almost think of it as like a tennis ball. Right? So even just kind of, well, that freaked me out, so I am going to save. The Druid. It says it's unable to record brush strokes, which I don't care about. I might have accidentally done a hotkey. Does anybody know why this is popping up? It says unable to record brush strokes, but I don't know what hotkey I accidentally touched. But it keeps telling me. I might have to close ZBrush real quick. Hold on. Better to just... Oh, it's a tablet error? Okay, thank you. If I close it and open it, it should be fine. We'll see. 1 second. pushed something too fast and it freaked out on me. Okay, there we go. Oh my gosh, basic materials, you're so scary. Go back to our skin shader. Okay, and we're back. So again, looking at all this very carefully, and also making sure that we're trying to capture something that feels, you know, the widest part of our faces is our zygomatic arch here. So as long as this is the widest part, you should be good. And these are all very subtle. When I say widest part, you know, if you make this super wide or something, you can do that. But it doesn't have to be super much wider than everything else. It's just, it's more about subtlety when it comes to, you know, sculpting faces and stuff. And faces is always something that you'll struggle with and constantly be learning new stuff about, or discovering new things as you sculpt them. Stroke, inventory, record, or press 3 shortcut to turn off. Okay. Thank you, grass green. I must have, I don't know what I hit for it to turn on. Because I didn't have any of that selected, but oh well. Just also making sure, it's nice to, I feel like one thing that can help with sculpting some face anatomy is actually also making sure that you have some nice neck anatomy as well. Because everything is kind of, it's all within context of other things, right? So if one thing's kind of feeling off or doesn't have quite the right shape that you're going for, you know, it might throw off other parts of your sculpt. So, you know, build slowly, build together. And I think you'll end up not going backwards so much in your process. I think that's also important. Because knowing like the sternal cloud on my suit is here, but it's also always thinner than the jaw. You always see a little bit of the jaw from the back. And we're making sure that you don't want it to be thicker, but you also don't want it to be so weak that it looks weird, right? So there's a lot of stuff like that too to consider, where these shapes and volumes are and how they relate to your face and character. Manga VF from YouTube is asking, could this character be used for animation as is, or does it have to be more higher resolution? I mean, you could animate this as is, but it's not probably going to look super good. Just because, you know, there's no detail yet, and also it's not probably going to rig super well, because in order for it to have a nice rig on it, needs to have like pretty good topology. Right now, this is all split up into different parts and things like that, so you know that's not always super helpful or useful when it comes to rigging for animation. But we are modeling this with the mind that we're going to be 3D printing it, so I'm not super worried about, I don't really care what the topology looks like. I'll make it look nice because it's easier to work with, but overall the topology doesn't matter when you're working on something like this. The head has already gotten smaller. Beautifully. So adding a little bit more resolution, I'm going to try to block in where the eyes would be, almost like as if you're sculpting it. So I don't like putting in eyes yet because you just don't have enough resolution for something like that. But you can start blocking in where those eyelids are going to be. And maybe we can make our character have a little bit of bigger eyes, since one, our character is going to be very small, but also, you know, if we're going for maybe like a more anime type feel, maybe we can have something more like that. So you can see you can get a pretty good base of what the eyes could look like without actually adding eyes yet. And another thing that I like to add as well, whoa, my brush size got really big, is just a hint of maybe where the eyebrows are going to be. Just a hint of something, because it helps, again, with proportion and seeing where these things lie. So a good rule of thumb is your eye should be an eye width apart. So if you take this section, it should be almost as big as the in-between, right? Now this changes, you know, if you have giant anime girl eyes, or something like Goofy's eyes or Mickey's eyes are super close together, right? There's always, anything that I say, there's always going to be an exception to the rule, because that's just part of style. So, you know, we can, if you want to, you can make a character's eyes a little closer together and a little bigger, you know, for the sake of maybe feeling a little more innocent, also feeling a little younger, where eyes will feel like this. Another thing that you want to note when you're sculpting a face, screen capture this real quick. Another draw over by Ashley Stegon. So a lot of people forget about the depth within a face, but it's really important to do this kind of stair stepping. So the brow is going to be the highest point of the eye, and then the eyelid is going to come next, and then the eyeball is going to come next, and then the eyelid here is actually going to be farther behind than the top of the eyelid. So you should get something that kind of slants back, and this creates depth within the eyeball. So if you see this online, that's basically what this is talking about. And then the thing that comes back behind the lid is actually your cheekbone, is actually your zygomatic arch. So then your cheekbone is here. And this is actually wrapping around to meet the bridge of the nose here. And then you're going to have your muzzle, right, with all your teeth here. You'll have your nasal cavity. It's actually really helpful to do drawovers like this. You have your temporal bone here, right, which goes into the zygomatic arch, and then your earlobes here. And so where our ear is looking pretty good. And then we have our jaw muscle, right, that comes down this way and does that, right? And same thing with the lips and the nose, is the nose is going to be the highest point, and then it's going to be your upper lip, then it's going to be your lower lip, and then it's going to be your chin. So again, we're looking and matching that angle that goes into the back. Always exceptions to the rules. There's plenty of instances of, you know, people's noses and then like these big lips that stick out as like for like funny caricatures and things like that. But again, start with what makes sense first and then push it into a different realm. So that's kind of what we're going for. But it's really helpful to do a draw over of your character's, you know, anatomy and say, do all these things, line up. There's a sternocleidomastoid, right? And then there's going to be the hyoid bone that's back here that connects all these muscles here. And even though this is a stylized character, it's important to keep all this stuff in mind, because that's what's going to make it feel real, right? And give it some structure. And that's all under and behind the eye. So if you do a draw over like this, or you can find a skull and kind of like warp it into the right proportion of your character's head and see if certain things line up. For right now, I think like the nose, for example, is a little too low. So I actually think the nose should be maybe a little higher on my character. But again, these drawers are super, super helpful, even for someone like me who's done this a decent amount of times. And that's where also drawing can help a lot too. You know, all these apexes and all this stuff that I'm dropping on you, even if you don't do 3D, you can still relate it back to 2D. These are all things that I also do when I do 2D drawing. So just keep that in mind as well. Gotta look for my reference of my character's face, kind of what I wanted to go for. These are always going to be really small changes to start with. The bridge of the nose is usually halfway to where the eye is. And the nose is halfway between the brow and the bottom of the chin, and then the mouth is usually a third. So these kind of proportions, you can just kind of keep that stuff in mind. So I can move this apex up a little bit more, maybe push this chin back a bit more. Start getting those apexes. An upturned nose is usually pretty feminine. You can kind of have whatever nose you would like to, though. How many on Twitch is asking, how did I do the draw over snapshot? I just hit Windows Shift S takes a screen grab, and then you can grab it from Snip and Sketch and just draw on top of it. That's all I did. So it's just a Windows app. Nothing fancy here. The mouth is usually halfway in the eyes, so that's where the corner of your mouth is going to be. And again, on 3D, this is so easy. Just hit where's a straight line, grab it, there you go, right? And it draws all across all forms. It's really easy to mark where certain things are. And it's important to sculpt what you can in the lowest resolution possible. You know, don't try to up your resolution a whole bunch to sculpt the mouth. Because you need to, if you work in the lowest resolution, it's going to be the easiest to see where those proportions are incorrect and to make the changes now rather than have like a bunch of polygons to deal with. So sculpt as much as you can, as low as you can to begin with. And then once you have something that you like, then you can up your resolution a bit more. If it's not looking good at this resolution, adding more polygons is going to make it look better, I promise you. It's kind of like having a bad proportional sketch, right? And then trying to draw something good on top of that. It's just not going to happen. You need something that, you need a good base first before you can add anything else to it. Trying to find where our eyebrows are going to sit. Right, and this fold here that goes into the eye. The smaller the chin, by the way, usually the more, the younger they'll look. And then you can also kind of do the same as they get older. Also, we kind of lose our chin. So the zygomatic arch is sticking out too much, so there's not enough depth going on here. Because the nostril of your nose actually goes back here, right? And then your nostril is kind of like up in this area. Like back over here. And again, I might be, this is the part where you're like, oh, I'm not probably getting enough polygons for this, right? Because I'm kind of struggling even making the shapes that I want to make. But you can see I can even kind of start to hint at where my nose is. Even with just like these few polygons that I'm dealing with. To try to get that shape right first. I really try to get all these shapes right first before adding more topology, because you're just going to end up fighting yourself a lot if you don't do it like this. Now, I'm also, keep in mind, technically, our character's going to be like this big. So, is doing a lot of detail on her face super important? No, I'm going to sculpt more because I think eventually I want to create a bigger piece of her, and paint that and do some fun stuff with it. That's not part of D&D. So I want to sculpt this still like as if I'm going to be printing it at a higher resolution. But technically, for 3D printing, I mean, you could get the basic shapes like that and print it, and it'd probably still look really good. But I'm going to obviously do more detailing than what would be probably necessarily required for, you know, this scale. The thinner nose out a little bit. Very, very small changes at this stage. And again, I'm going to find, where's that zygomatic arch going back into here. And look at your side profile as well. This profile here, that's really what I'm working on in sculpting, making sure that this feels, not too much volume, because there's also a plane that goes right here. That's not part of the temporal lobe. That's right here. And I'm keeping this pretty sketchy. There's always also like a little bit of a roundness kind of in this area of the skull. And this is a little bit more flat where the brow is. And you can kind of sculpt all this stuff in, and then you can always choose to relax it and smooth it out later if you don't want it. But knowing it's there will help you be more informed and make better decisions on your sculpt. So as you can see, I feel like I'm fighting with my resolution now because I kind of want to sculpt in a little bit more eyelids and things. So I'm going to start increasing this resolution a bit more. You can see it's not by a lot. I just want, you can see now I can get a little bit more detail than I couldn't before and keep building these shapes. I don't want super sad eyes. You can give really sad eyes. I want the eyes to feel pretty strong. So I want the apex of her eyes maybe to change a little bit. She's also supposed to be inspired from kind of Asian as well. Which you don't have to if you don't want to. I mean, it's a fantasy character, but if you want her to feel a little bit more Asian, we can give her more of like an Asian skull, which means zygomatic, all these same planes are still there. They're just all slightly flatter than what would be on like a Caucasian skull. Like if you go to college and study anthropology, they'll have you study a skull, and you have to decide whether is it from Africa? Is it from Eastern Asia? Is it from South America or Antarctica? And all sorts of stuff. So also, if you look up Anatomy for Sculptors has great reference of individual like skulls from different ethnic groups in different cultures, and it's pretty awesome to see that even with just the skull, you can identify you. Like you have your own cool features that make you you. I think it's really important to study that stuff as well to give more diversity and culture to our characters. The more you know about the world, the better your art is always going to be. Post just posted the Anatomy for Sculptors, and they have a really great book that I recommend for everybody. You can also find some snippets of the book itself on things like Pinterest and stuff if it's kind of out of your price range, but it's worth the Google regardless. And it has tons of really, really cool info. I'm going to go ahead and save because redoing a head is never fun. And chances are if I zoom out, her head didn't get too small. It's actually okay. Her hands are definitely too long. There's a lot of things that are wrong proportionally still. Her hands are super long. And that's partially because we made her arms, or not her arms, her legs long, right? So where her ribs are should probably be about where the bicep and the elbow is. Means this should be a little bit shorter. Means this should, whoops, come up a little bit more. Probably be something a little bit more around there. I'll probably have to thin out her legs a little bit more or bring her legs might be a little too tall. I might have exaggerated a little bit more than I wanted for my character, but it's okay to go bigger than to, not try at all. Because again, dialing back is easier than pushing the shapes forward. So, whoops. Just keep that stuff in mind. You're gonna constantly, as you make, especially, I like to kind of try to figure out my character's face the most after I block out the body, because that's going to determine pretty much everything else that I want to shape out for my character. You can add more resolution now. And start defining that nostril more and where that blend and shape into the nose is going to be. Where the eyelid is. So there's going to kind of be a depth spot right here in the back where the zygomatic arch is and where the eyelid actually starts. So making sure, if you look up at your character, this is also probably something that I maybe lost while sculpting, is if you look, her her eyes are a little flat, so you can always round out that apex more and make sure that your character's eyes are round. And same thing with the mouth, making sure that the mouth is round. If you take a bite out of like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you look at it, you pretty much have a perfect half crescent shape. So make sure that your muzzles are nice and rounded. So looking up at your models is always really important. View them from angles that you usually forget to view them from. And that'll help a lot when looking at your model and you're like, man, something doesn't feel right. Like something's off, but I don't know what. Chances are, looking at those angles, you can usually find something and correct it. Usually. Not always, but usually. And then again, looking at the side of here, if this overlaps into that and this kind of cuts away, then you should have your nice overlap, because the cheek goes past beyond where this eyelid goes. So making sure those overlaps feel right. Oh, during our stream, Jace just printed the small hair clump and it worked. Hooray! Hip hip hooray for hair clumps. Not in my own hair, but in, 3D modeling. Oh, I'm sorry, Rico left. If somebody speaks Spanish, someone could translate that for me, but I'd love to answer you. I don't know how well Google Translate with that. Sorry. I'm sorry. I speak 2 languages. I speak bad English and sarcasm, so I'm pretty bad. There was one thing that I wish I could just automatically be really good at. It would be learning languages. Learning languages are so hard for me because I'm very visual as a person, and languages are usually just very audible, and yeah, I struggle a lot with learning languages. It sucks. Duolingo is actually pretty helpful. This is not sponsored by Duolingo, but I like that it gives you like a visual picture of something while you're learning it. That helped me a lot, but yeah, remembering languages is really tricky for me. Oh good, your English is not too bad. Your English is probably better than mine. I misspell words all the time. I'm gonna pull this back a bit more, right? Because I want that roundness. She looks so angry. Hopefully this is exciting for you guys. I know that it's like, man, working a long time on this face. And you're like, yep, that's a face. It's the most important part. Gotta work on it. Gotta make it look cool. If this doesn't look cool, the rest of the character is probably not going to be that interesting. So. That's getting there. She looks like she's got angry tight mouth. So let me fix where that. I can give her. I can try. I like giving characters a little bit of either a smile or a frown, depending on, you know, whether your character is happy or sad. Most of the time, I think my character's pretty happy. I mean, she talks to animals all the time. There's not much to complain about there. Oh, Rico left is saying thanks for the master class. Appreciate, no problem. I wish I was a master, but I will give you the knowledge that I have. I kind of like this, like, maybe a little over pouty lip. You can always give, like, little personality to your characters. By maybe having this cute little, like, almost cat mouth type mouth, we can play with it. Again, I don't want her to feel... She's not, like, super aggressive. She's a neutral, you know, nature character. So I would imagine she, you know, she fights for her friends, but overall I think she's more introverted and maybe just more you know, she's not mean, she's just more awkward when she talks to people because she usually likes to talk to animals. She just prefers talking to animals. It's not that she doesn't like talking to people or she has something against people. So, you know, I want her to feel approachable. Just adding some slight plane changes to the mouth now to make sure I differentiate the mouth parts from the chin. And I'm being pretty light with my forms here. Might be a little bit too much of a cat mouth, but we can pull it up just a little bit and still keep it. You can see if you look at this for now, I want to pull that down a little bit. Start shaping that mouth a bit more. So you can see that my nose comes back, my upper lip, and then it's my lower lip. and then it's the chin, right? So still keeping all those apexes that we've worked on from the very beginning to get to where we are now. Obviously still tons more work to go, but you can see that progress can be made as long as you're being very thoughtful. You know, I'm trying to be very conscious still of all those fundamental skull and head foundations. Because if I don't like it yet from here, there's no point in going further. Oh, Rico's asking, is it an elf? That's the class that we're going with. So yes, it is basically like Legolas from Lord of the Rings, except mine's a female character. Mine's technically a half elf, but that's just a fancy D&D, you know, term. I need more resolution. I demand resolution. So I can start sculpting in the ear. Ear is another really important one to get in there as well, for sake of depth. There's a lot of depth in an ear, and so getting that silhouette to feel right. I don't mind right now if this is dwindling. I know I told you not to do this, right, for the size, but right now, because it's Dynamesh, it's just going to be annoying and do that. Until we Z-remesh it and plump that up, there's not much we can do. So I'm going to pull this back. So there's tons of depth in the ear, right? Because the ear goes into your head. So making sure that you have, you know, enough room there to give depth to that ear. And ears also have some really interesting apexes. Now with pointy ears, it's a little more difficult to play exactly to those. But it is important to kind of, you know, if we want this ear to feel, you know, usable and kind of realistic-ish or follow those same shapes, you know, we can kind of give her character some of those same little curvatures. It's a little more difficult, again, because it's longer, but actually the part that bumps out the most when you look at the side profile or the front profile of an ear is actually inside the ear. There's that weird little kind of like Y-shaped part of your ear. Kind of does this, so it's a little like Y that goes down and like that. If you look at it from the front, you'll actually, most people, you'll see it from the front, and then it kind of dips down into there, and then this goes all the way back into there. Obviously, because the ears are so much longer than ours, our ears would normally, you know, cut off like right around this area here. So it's a little easier to draw than the curvature of the back of the ear, but we can still kind of keep the same idea to give more interest. I think I want maybe even pointier ears. I have pretty pointy ears actually in my reference or in my drawing. My ears are like boom, you know, they're like pretty up there. So we can kind of play with that. And I think that helps make her feel more like an animal. Maybe when she's sad, she's like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, goblins could be, goblins also do have, you know, big pointy ears. Well, because I think some lore, goblins are like demonic versions of elves, which is why they have the pointy ears still. Because they're like bred from elf blood or something. I don't know. I love Lord of the Rings, but I'm not an expert. Cool. And then another thing also that's going to help with selling your character is you're never going to see your character bald. So I actually think it helps a lot to block in some hair to get an idea of who your character is and how they feel. So I'm going to grab where her hairline is probably going to be, which is something probably like that, right? And then we're going to extract that. Ooh, and we're done, guys. Afro Druid. It's gonna be great. We're not gonna. I'm gonna smooth this stuff down, and I'm gonna push some of this in. I'm gonna keep some of the volume. Oh my god, I love it. I love it so much. It's so funny. Guys, I might just keep it. It's pretty great. But you know, I'm gonna keep some of the volume because I can go in here with the snake hook brush now, and it'll ask me about Sculptress, and I'll always say no, leave me alone. I'm gonna turn off symmetry, and then for my character, I have, you know, some bangs that kind of fall. This is really, really, really rough, by the way, guys. This is just getting some basic hair ideas. Turn on that Dynamesh. It's gonna be pretty high resolution. There we go. So it's important to just get the volume of these hair strands first. And then I think for me, I think I have her where she's gonna have like a back ponytail. So I can turn on symmetry for this and have all the hair go back into where the ponytail will be, which I think I picture it kind of lower because it's gonna, you know, her headdress is gonna take up a lot of it. And then her hair, I'm gonna actually group this, and then I'm gonna duplicate it, and I'm gonna flip it. Woo! Getting some pretty stuff there. Squish all this stuff down, smooth this out. Crazy though, but stay with me. Auto group it. Dynamesh it by groups. So now they're going to be separate. And then I'm going to inflate this like crazy. There we go. And now I have like a basic volume for where I picture her having kind of like longish hair. I can turn on symmetry to try to squish this into basically a ponytail, right? So it's going to do something like that. I like the idea of her having very long, like kind of feral hair that she pulls back. So I'll pull this down. Get that Sculptress going. I'll pull this all down. I like to inflate a lot and then re-Dynamesh to get, you know, hair strands. And I always sculpt in the way flow of the hair, right? So she's gonna leave her bangs out of the ponytail, but her ponytail is gonna have all these going down into there. Right, something like that. And then we'll have her feral wild hair doing wild hair things. Which honestly, you know, might not even end up having to sculpt it because she does have that giant fur mass in the back. But again, it's just nice to always have something in its place so we can take a look at volume and see how, you know, it's kind of pairing up with everything else proportion-wise and whatnot. I like trying to capture again that silhouette and where that volume of the hair would be. If we're having trouble with one part, we can always mask one part, you know, and push it back and move it around. And then we can grab this a little bit here. Just try not to grab anything beyond it. maybe this just kind of attaches or is kind of sharing the same volume with this one. So if this merges later, that's fine. Something like that. So again, just getting this stuff basically on paper, you know, in Sculpt, whatever you want to call it, is the most important part of the process here. Just so we can go, does this feel right for our character? Is this something that is working for our character? You know, how big? How does her hair part? Does her hair part mostly on one side? Right? That's what it seems to be right now. And then maybe there's just like smaller strands on this side that kind of bunch together and do whatever. It's always important too to eventually look up some hairstyles. And if we put on transparency, we can see also, you know, how big is her hair in comparison to her head. You don't want it to match super thin. Like, hair has quite a bit of volume, so it's important to keep that volume, but don't let it be so big that it's going to make your character's head feel small. You want it to feel like it's her hair that's, you know, like this volume got a little too big, right? So I'm going to try to even out some of that volume there. Something like that. Right, and that's feeling pretty good. I think proportion-wise, she's still feeling okay. I'm still 50-50 on her legs, but I think some of that has to do with the fact that her ankles feel, I don't know, there's something, maybe it's her ankles that don't have the correct apexes. So you can see in the silhouette, they just kind of like two little sticks. So I think that might be throwing me off. Having a flat side to where the shin is also helps a lot with making it not feel like a cylinder. Your calf really is not a cylinder. Your calf is a way more complicated shape than that. So I think some of that stuff is kind of throwing it off, which again, at this lowest resolution, you want to make sure that you're hitting these apexes. Also, same thing with the ankles. So we're going to do another snapshot here. So if I have the legs here, there's a bunch of different apexes of the legs that are important. So the first one is the great trochanter, which is here. So your hips are here, and then there's the ball and socket, and then there's your protuberance right here, which is where your femur is, and then your femur comes down like this, and then you have your patella, which is your kneecap, and then you have your tibia and fibula. I believe, if I remember correctly, it's on the outside of your leg. Part of me's like, is it? I always forget. But what's important about noting all this stuff is, I'll do it on the other side of the character, is so there's going to be an apex here. There's going to be an apex right here, high on the outside. So there's an apex here on the calf, and then the next apex is lower. So you can see that you're going to be getting this smooth transition to each one, and then the higher point on the ankle, which is where I think I was messing up here, is the ankle is higher here and then lower here. And then you have your foot come out, and then you have the little toesies, right? So I think it's those shapes that I'm kind of missing. So if you forget it, I always remember high on the outside. So the highest points on each of these is always going to be the outside of the limb. So it's the great trochanter, it's the calf muscle that's higher than the calf muscle on the other side, and then the ankle is higher on the other side than the inside. So you always are going to be getting this on each side, which means you get a zigzag. So when you look at the leg, you get this nice zigzag back and forth. And I hope my drawing, I hope that makes sense. And then with the knee, you also get, because of where that shin ridge is right here, you get the shin bone actually curving like this. So you get this kind of like flat part on the shin, and then the volume is actually in the back of the muscle, right where your calf muscle is. So that's anatomy with Ashley Stegon. So there you go. So try to look for these points on your sculpt, and you'll that's kind of where, when I talk about looking at silhouette, these are the things that I'm looking at. And I don't know if I've ever really made that super clear in my past. You got me looking at my calves, right? I know. You'll start looking at all your muscles and being like, whoa, really? Like that? Okay. And it's super helpful. I actually think working out's also really helpful for this stuff, because you'll feel where these muscles are, and you'll have a better understanding of your own body. And a better understanding of your own body can only help you in understanding your own anatomy, right? It's amazing how much humans don't know about their own self. So I think it's pretty important to study these things. Make you a more competent artist, but also, I just think, a more competent human, because you have a better understanding of you, and there's no harm in that ever. So gotta round out the ball of her foot a little bit more. Again, looking at the foot as well is, I mean, you can put your feet flat on the ground, you can look at it, but the arch of your foot actually is, a very positive shape on the outside, and then you have that dip of where the heel is, and then you have the arch, which is more on the inside of your foot than it is on the outside. So that's where your arch is actually more on the inside. Even if you're flat-footed or you have a really high arch, that's where that divot's going to be. So you'll see more of that curviness on the inside, and then the outside will be a bit more of a solid shape. Her feet are huge. It's also partly because there's no perspective on, but your feet are ginormous. Funny, from the top they looked huge, and that's probably because they're just really wide, which isn't bad. I mean, if you run around barefoot in the wilderness like our character, maybe she does have kind of like really weird wide feet, as long as it's intentional. Maybe she's got like some hobbit feet going on, she's got some tough feet. For butt muscles, you can almost think of like a butterfly shape. So if you think of, if this is a butterfly, these are the top wings, there's the body, and then there's the bottom wings. And the bottom wings are always bigger than the top wings. And then right here in the middle is where your great trochanter is. And then this muscle goes down and attaches to your femur. And then this is where your hamstrings come out of. So we're not going to get into super crazy anatomy because it's a stylized character, but this is just good to note. And then you have your hips here. This all follows your pelvics, your pelvic crest right here. Yep. And so then the crest of your pelvis is here. And this is where your quad attaches. So this is where your quad muscles go down. And this is also where that serratus muscle is. Yes, right? Serratus, or is it sartorius? Sartorius or serratus, there's two. So your serratus muscles, I think, are here. And then sartorius, I think, is this muscle. They have that as this, don't. So yeah, the sartorius muscle here goes down and wraps around the leg, and then it wraps and connects actually down to the tibia, the tibia right there past the knee, which is where you get this nice curve onto the leg. And that's where you'll kind of get like the second apex in here, is you'll get this split. You'll see it in really toned muscles. If you look at legs, you'll see this little split right there. And that's the difference between the muscles that are striking out from the pelvis versus the muscle that's overlapping down, which is the quad, or one of the quads, one of the four, who would have thought, that goes down into that, so you get all that breakup. Man, I can't remember languages, but I remember this stuff. It's so annoying. It's fine. I've just been working on this longer than languages. So again, I have not added breaths to our character because you're trying to nail what's underneath first, and then you can fix all the stuff that's on top. You can see if I carve that in and then smooth it out, you actually still get a remnants of everything that I sculpted, which for stylized stuff is pretty nice. So I can make a little bit more of a straight I kind of pulled out that pelvic crest a little too much. I can kind of flatten this side out a little bit. And then you can get where that great trochanter is. Bring this stuff up. And we'll start to get a nice, it's the secret to a nice butt is get that butterfly. That was taught by John Brown at Gnomon back in the day for traditional sculpting. I'm going to use the mask pen tool to extract some breasts. I know, everyone blush emoji. Oh my god. Oh no, female anatomy. What's gonna happen? Don't be scared. It's okay. So you want to think of them as basically like water balloons or like little teardrops as to where they attach. And then the volume, again, if it's like a water balloon, the volume is always going to be at like the bottom of the shape. So it's important to note that the volume of these things are going to be at the bottom. And they're very tricky to get. They're always kind of a weird one. I'm kind of trying to remember actually right now. It's been a hot minute. No, they totally attach over here. Don't attach them up here. That looks silly. They attach upwards and into there. It's better almost to keep them flat at the top and then again have the volume sit at the bottom, and it'll just feel a little bit more organic. Now, obviously, if your character's wearing really tight armor, or if you think about, I don't know if there's ladies in the stream that know how to wear a sports bra. Like sports bras, like, sit really tight on the chest. Or there's some, I've seen also some drawing. If you think of like Mulan like wraps herself, right? So she has like a really tight attire. So it also depends a lot on what your character is going to be wearing as to the shape of these things, because it's a very organic shape. So just keep that stuff in mind as well. The butterfly. And it's funny because you can think of it as the butt or fly, right? Okay, guys, good way to remember. Richo, I think you were asking, you might be done watching. I think you were asking something about the proportion, but I hope my leg demo kind of made sense. You can always watch the earlier part of the stream as well to catch the beginning portion layouts of the character. So again, you can have something kind of simple, maybe like that. And again, remember, we're adding this late out after the fact because a female character still has chest muscles. There's still, underneath here, there's still pectoralis muscles that go up and into the armpit, right? Still a rib cage, still a sternum. There's still all this anatomy that goes into there. So remember that. you want, you can add a bit more fat up at the top. And I'm gonna, it's really distracting when other things are different colors. So I always like to fill up the objects. So I will move this hand down now. I think the part that looks the funkiest on this is where these things are a little too fat, where they're attaching. So just trying to give them more breathing room. These pinching overlap things don't really happen on your hand unless you're really squishing them better. But even then, you don't get like this inflated overlap onto your hands unless you have like chubby baby fingers. Then by all means, sculpt chubby baby fingers. I'm sure they're fun to sculpt. I personally have never sculpted chubby baby fingers, so that would be a new one. Also, I'm going to move the hand's palm down a bit more. Palm was a little too squished. A good rule of thumb, ha 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 ha, get it? Because I'm about to talk about the thumb, is the thumb, if you draw an arc from the first knuckle outward, so another screenshot by Ashley. Here we go. So fun, you guys. You guys like my puns. So if this is the knuckles, the first, so you have your first knuckles, and then you have your second knuckles, and the third ones. And they should all kind of flow into an arc like that. Usually if you sculpt kind of like in an arch this way, that usually gives you an indication about how long your thumb is. So your thumb, not always, but it will be about that long. So if you look at your hand, you sculpt, and you look at that arch on your thumb, you'll be like, oh yeah, it does make an arc with my second knuckles. And then if you put your hand together, your thumb is as long as your first knuckle. So again, if you sprawl them out, the arc goes to the second knuckle. And if you bring your hand in, that thumb will be slightly longer than that first knuckle that's right here. So if you when you squeeze them in. So that means that this probably needs to get a little longer. This maybe can stay kind of the same, but that's a good way to kind of figure out some proportions on your hand. So I can probably make her thumb a little smaller, and I can bring the palm out to be a little longer. So that's the rule of laugh at my puns. Laugh at them. I didn't even mean to, I swear. It just comes naturally. So now we have something kind of like that, and it won't look quite right until you add, you know, all the good stuff, which would mean we have to subdivide and do all those things. But having those hands in place like that is good. Another thing to think about is your squishy pads on the inside of your hands are always going to be in front of where your knuckle is. So it's kind of hard to sculpt it here, but you want to make sure that your pad is actually in front of where your knuckle is. And that'll help. That actually, most of the time when I look at like student hands and drawings, if I just make that one change, it looks so much better because it has a natural angle and flow to hands. We know what hands look at. Like, we stare at them all the time. We just don't, you know, sit and measure and calculate most of the time all the little proportions that you have. But, you know, again, if you're sculpting a hand, you have two references right in front of you. So, you know, don't be afraid to look at your own hands and be fascinated by them. You know, you don't have to be on psychedelics to think your hands are interesting. Hands are pretty interesting by default. 54 bones in the hand alone. There's 206 bones total in the human body, which means half of your bones are just in like your hands and feet. It's a lot of bones. It's a lot of stuff going on in there. So enjoy them, and they let you do art, which is really cool. So appreciate your hands. Say thank you, hands. Every night, say thanks, hands. I love you, and then you can go to bed and be happy to use your hands the next day. Well, I think that is wrapping up our stream. So let's do a handy dandy save your work, because I have a tendency to not do that. And then I lose all my work that I just showed you guys. So I think one thing that I'm looking at, last final note, is her legs are too thick. In comparison to the rest of her body. So you can do one or two things. You can either thicken up the rest of her, or you can thin out her legs. And now that you have those apexes in place, it's a lot easier to make something thinner with those apexes there. You know, you can even probably use the pinch brush a little bit to pinch those down. We're going to be careful because we don't want it to be so thin that it won't print or something. But it does need to be a little thinner. So we'll play with that next time. But with that, I think we can pretty much wrap it up for this stream. We've got our base character blocked out with her nice big feet. It's awesome. Got her hair blocked in along with a really simple face, right, that we can refine later. I think we have a good block in for everything. And then next week we can, I'll probably refine her body a little bit more, and then we can start adding her clothing and all that stuff, all the good fun stuff that makes her a character and not just some weird body sculpt. So we can play with that next week. But for now, we'll be signing off. Again, thank you guys so much for watching the stream and joining me. It's always a pleasure. Excited to keep working on this character with you guys. So stay tuned, and then hopefully I'll be able to show you guys some cool little prints at the end of it. So again, this was Archetype. I'll be back next Tuesday from 4 to 6. I am your host, Ashley. This stream is sponsored by Lenovo and AMD. And you guys have a lovely Tuesday night. I'll catch you later. Bye.